Thank you, SERA, for having us as a partner for the event. I'd rather... Sorry. So we worked on a similar event last year around sustainable food systems, and I'll be saying a lot of the same points as I made last year because very little has changed in that year in terms of considering plant-based as part of the solution to the climate crisis. It's quite surprising that this point is falling on deaf ears given the weight of scientific consensus around it. So since our panel a year ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have said that consistent evidence indicates that in general, a dietary pattern that is higher in plant-based foods, such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and lower in animal-based foods is more health-promoting and associated with lower environmental impact. We've also had the Committee on Climate Change saying that changes in people's diets, if it leads to reduced UK production of products such as beef, lamb and milk, could have significant impact on emissions. And the Eat Lancet report recommended an increased consumption of plant-based foods, while in many settings substantially limiting animal-sourced foods. So there's a large body of work has emerged now about the environmental impacts of various diets, and most of these studies have concluded that a diet rich in plant-based foods and with fewer animal-sourced foods will result in both improved health and environmental benefits. But then in contrast to this, last week we had the Welsh Environment Minister, the Labour Minister, saying that she doesn't think we need to eat less meat, and that in Wales it's very, very sustainable. We've also had the NFU saying that reducing the number of animals that they farm is a red line for them. In fact, they believe we can produce more, yet still hit the ambitious emission reduction targets that they've set. And given there's no available technology to reduce the inherent emissions of ruminant animals, it's simply unrealistic. But more people are eating plant-based despite the lack of any incentives. Mintel report that sales of the meat-free market are forecast to increase by 44% over the next 5 years. So as it stands, there's a situation which we could have where we're producing food that people don't want to eat, that's bad for the environment, that the scientific community are saying we shouldn't produce, and certainly for the next 5 years we'll be paying for it through the subsidy system too. Of course the food system is incredibly complex and different types of farming, animal farming, have different impacts. And we hear a lot about the benefits of grass-fed cattle, but those benefits have been disproven by the Food Climate Research Network's Grazed and Confused report. They looked at whether grazing ruminants could help sequester carbon in the soil, and if so, to what extent this might compensate for their methane emissions, and their answer was not much. That said, farmers do, of course, do a lot to support biodiversity, protect our land, and put food on our tables. I'm simply suggesting that that food should be different. So the Vegan Society's Grow Green campaign makes the case for a shift from animal agriculture to plant protein agriculture. And we talk specifically about the benefits of pulses, so peas, beans and legumes, which are nutritionally valuable and will be an ideal source of protein if people are to reduce their meat intake. They're also great for iron and fibre content. Pulses have a host of environmental benefits. They're nitrogen-fixing crops, so they take nitrogen from the air and deposit it in the soil, so resource-intensive nitrogen fertilisers aren't usually required. So by transitioning away from animal proteins and towards protein crops, we would be reducing methane emissions, reducing water use, and respecting animal rights. We could certainly be growing a lot more crops for human consumption on our land than we currently do, but of course not all land is suitable for growing things like pulses, and this is where we need to look at reforestation and rewilding. Much of our land would naturally be ancient woodland, but currently 87% of the UK is unwooded. There are rare pieces of land which have been grazed for hundreds of years and contain unusual biodiversity mixes, but these could be retained by free-living animals. As I say, all of this is very complicated, and we don't expect to see an overnight transition to a plant-based world. But what we do expect is political acknowledgement of the need to support those who are ready, willing, and able to make the shift. At the Vegan Society, we receive an increasing number of requests for support from animal farmers who want to use their land differently. And this is often driven by economic concerns, often Brexit-related, environmental worries, or an ethical realisation. And at the moment, there's no support in place for those farmers to make the shift that's so desperately needed. So we urgently need policies in place to acknowledge and support the role of plant-based in our future food system. And I hope that in events like this one, we can gain some consensus on the role of plant-based and that the Shadow Minister will take on some of our recommendations.